Hey guys, welcome back. So today's video is inspired by a comment I received in last week's video, essentially asking me if I had to start over my anthurium collection again, what would I start with? And it was kind of like in the context of like, what would I recommend to a beginner? But I don't know about you. I think about this stuff all the time because I live in a fantasy world. So I always imagine starting like from a blank slate. If my collection were to be wiped out, what would be the building blocks that I think would be really representative of what I really like now? Knowing what I know and like having the experience growing different types of plants, what brings me the most joy? And when you have a pretty sizable collection, sometimes you just fantasize about not having any plant care to do just for a little bit. I don't think I could ever live my life without any plants, but sometimes I think about if I had nothing and I can have the thrill of like just collecting again and like picking and choosing what to add to my space without having the worry of not having the space, like having too many plants. And one day this could be a real scenario I'm faced with where I move out of the country. If I were to move to the UK, I would probably try to bring some plants with me, but I would also probably realistically have to start over. So rather than having this all in my head, I decided to actually write a list of if I had nothing and I was just starting over with anthuriums again, what would be the building blocks of a collection that either could stand alone on its own and would have enough variety in traits and growth habits and things like that to keep my interest, but also could be a foundation that I can add to or breed with. So I think oftentimes when this topic comes up, a lot of people will kind of go back to the basics, as in pure species. My list is not all pure species. It's plants that I have a really strong fondness for, that I always, like if it was gone, I would feel I would feel the void. And for lack of a better like description, it's kind of plants that I have a good relationship with, so they don't really cause me headaches. So there are going to be beautiful plants, classic pure species, that do not make this list because I just don't have the best relationship with them. But for the vast majority of them, I do own the plant. So I'm going to show you the plant, my experience with them, things I love about them, things I may not love about them, but I can kind of overlook because in general the plant is really great, and talk about why I think they're so essential to my personal anthurium collection. By the way, I have not sat with this list long enough to be 100% sure this is like the list. This is what I'm feeling right now in this week. So if I might miss something, but if you think I've missed something or there's something like very specific to your collection that you could not live without, please let me know. So the first one should come as absolutely no surprise to anyone. Anyone who knows me can probably call it right now. It is Carla Blackier. I don't know how many Carlas I have right now. A lot of them are seedlings, but I want to say I have something like 8 or 9, and I have 2 that just currently put out new leaves. I'm going to show you these ones. This one is Carla RA 1x16. It just put out this new leaf. It's still hardening off, so it's still a little bit floppy, but it's a good, decent upsize from the one before. And then my Woo2 self also just put out a new leaf, and it's still kind of recovering from I don't even know what, but this one, hold on, let me put this one down. I hope the camera picks up how pink the veins are, but I don't actually think it is. Let me see. If I get really close, maybe, no, it's pink all the way to the bottom, but I think on the viewfinder, it's only picking up like this pink right here. But hopefully this illustrates how variable Carlas are, and they're so widely available now, and the prices are dropping a lot. And that is mainly to do with how quick Carlas are for bearing seeds. So from pollination, it's like 2.5 months. Sometimes it's like closer to 2 months, and they're so quick to breed. So a lot of people are just cranking out pure Carlas, as in breeding Carla with another Carla, but the variety of appearance in the offspring is really exciting. In terms of difficulty level, I would say it really depends on the specimen. I've had ones that are a bit more finicky, like this one. My Woo One self, which looks awful right now because it's been bearing seeds and it really needs a repot, so I don't want to show that. It just looks horrible. But that one was growing like an absolute tank, super forgiving, until it made, not back to back, but like berry batch, flower, and then another berry batch. So right now it's looking very much under the weather, so I have to kind of restart it, repot it, maybe take a cutting. This one, which is the Woo2 self, is a lot slower for me and maybe not as robust. This one, the 1x16, is also not the most robust plant. With like a little bit of underwatering it's really quick to do this kind of thing. Whereas I feel like the Wu One Self was always a lot more forgiving than this one. This one is RA8 Self and it's got very, very thin veins. It hasn't been the most robust thing for me either. This one is probably my least robust Carla, but in terms of difficulty level, they're not the most difficult anthurium in my collection, not by a long shot. I wouldn't say that this plant is any more difficult than, let's say, a Forgeti, a pure Forgeti, a pure crystallinum. I often recommend those to beginners because you get to learn some of the more difficult parts of growing anthurium, like being super consistent with watering, establishing the root system before dropping the humidity, and dialing in the nutrients, and just the general consistency that is required to grow anthurium well. I think those plants are just difficult enough for beginners to really learn and get confident with growing anthurium. I would say this plant is about the same. Whenever there's issues like this, I know exactly what happened. This happened because I let it completely dry out and I watered it deeply, so there was edema on the edges and then it just kind of burst the cells. And if I were to start my collection over, I would definitely 100% get at least a couple of Carlas. I'd probably buy a few seedlings from different breeding pairings and just see what comes of it. And also thinking, like, if I look at my tent right now, so many of my most favorite plants are Carla hybrids. And also, like, I was just checking on my Carla Bup seedling this morning, and they're just, I want to say I'm not biased. I think objectively speaking, if I just walked in here, a stranger, and looked at this plant, I think I would really like it. Look at this one. Look at those veins. It's getting a little bit blown out, so I'm gonna back up a little bit. I just watered this morning, but look how thin those veins are. The leaf is so dark. This little one that was a bit of a straggler, look at the veins on that. It's quite pink in person up here, but I don't know if it's showing up for you. And like, look at this one. Ooh, this one. So cute, right? And this is not even a pure Carla, but these have been an absolute joy. I'm so proud. I cannot believe I made this. I know Carlas have been super hyped for a long time, and I think the hype is dying down a little bit, but I think forever is going to be, I mean, it's weird to call a plant a classic, right? But it objectively, it has traits that will always be beautiful. It's got contrasting silver veins. They have this like kind of faded drop off at the ends usually. It's heart-shaped, it's velvet, it's quite dark, some darker than others. The only thing that's kind of annoying about Carla is its growth habit. So it has a tendency to grow very horizontal in the petioles. These ones are not quite big enough to show you that. It's not really that horizontal, but when it gets more mature, it tends to almost like point downwards. My Wu One Carla is a lot more mature, like the stem is like this fat, and there are petioles that are almost fully vertical, but I think I can overlook it because the petioles are quite short, quite compact. The growth habit, that kind of stays very close together, so it doesn't take as much horizontal real estate. And besides that, it's not the only anthurium that does that. Other anthurium, I'm thinking of like some crystallinum, it will grow really horizontal petioles, but the petioles are like 5 times longer. So I can definitely see myself growing old with Carla in my collection. The next one is a completely different plant and one that I would definitely recommend to anyone who's new to anthurium, but also is kind of new to plants in general. And that of course is Anthurium Wen Ling. I chose to show you the one that's easiest to pick up. It's in a 4-inch pot. So I think every anthurium collection needs a strap leaf. Now for me, it's either or both of Pallidiflorum and Wen Ling. But if I had to choose between the two, I might choose Wen Ling. And the reason for that is I've owned a couple of Pallidiflorum and I own like 4 or 5 Wen Ling. Both of them grow really well in ambient. Both of them are quite forgiving of suboptimal care, like missing a watering here and there, low humidity, stuff like that. But Wen Ling for me grows a little bit slower. Me and Pallidiflorum have kind of a history fraught with tension because I broke one on camera, not once, but twice, and I broke another one off camera. And every time I did that, I was left with a rootless piece of stem, the top cutting, and it rooted like a dream. But we have this history. But I want to say that part of the reason why we got to the point where the plant was so root bound, it was too hard to get out of the plant and then I broke the top, or it got so heavy that it fell off the shelf, it was because Pallidiflorum kind of grows really fast. The Wen Ling grows a little slower for me. And I've had Wen Ling since 2020, 2021. And I've never had that problem. I'm not really sure why. I think because I think it must be the growth rate. It just was never in a position where it would just fall off a shelf. I didn't really investigate this much. So this is just off the top of my head. But if I were to choose one, I think Wen Ling slightly edges out the pallidiflorum. Although I do think of all the strap leaves, those two are my favorite, and I think both of them have a permanent place in my collection. But I'm choosing to show you this one. This one I've had for a year and a half, something like that, and it came as a little seedling, roughly about this size, and it's growing really well. It's super root bound, needs to be repot. I just watered it today. I need to get this in a bigger pot. If it wasn't in this glass vessel, it definitely would fall over, but this is definitely not a plant that needs high humidity. I have it growing in a tree fern mix. It's tree fern, I think it's tree fern soil, but very heavy on the tree fern. But because of its growth habit, if the pot is too light, it will fall over, because basically in the wild, they grow at the tops of trees and they start to like angle downwards. So you can see this one's going quite horizontal, but eventually it's going to start pointing down. So for that reason, you can't really pot it straight up, because eventually it's going to do this and the weight is going to be skewed onto one side. So if you're going to grow this plant, you definitely need to have it in a pot that's heavy enough to support the weight, that will always be heavier than the foliage. This is a really thick glass container that I got from the dollar store. And of course, the most special thing about Wen Ling is that when they flower, it's a corkscrew inflorescence. Not all Wen Ling have the corkscrew, but the vast majority of what's in the market are corkscrew Wen Ling. They're usually quite leathery. Some of them can be quite dimply. This is not that dimply of a specimen. I'm going to put in a photo of what NSC Wen Ling, which I do own one of, but it's not big enough to be that dimply yet. And I usually tend to gravitate towards plants with a little bit thicker of a texture or has a visual texture. And Wen Ling kind of checks both those boxes. And if you want to get really into the nitty gritty of Wen Ling, there is variability depending on where it comes from. There's like wider leaf, the narrower leaf, long leaf, shortish leaves. This one I want to say is maybe a longer leaf one. I'm not really sure. I have one, my original one is like a more short and wide variety, but the leaves are even more thick than this one. Like if I did this, it flops, right? The other one, if I lift it up like this, it would just be like this. Like it's like a board. So there's definitely a collectability there. I will say this looks very similar to Vitarifolium. I don't really like Vitarifolium. I've grown a couple in the past and I just don't find them as forgiving and easy to grow as Pallidiflorum Wen Ling. I don't know, maybe I never got the nutrients down, but they would grow wonky leaves a little bit more easy, and then they would just kind of put out leaves all over the place, where I feel like the Wen Ling is a little bit more tidy. Same with the Pallidiflorum, and these two plants would be in my collection not for breeding purposes, just for visual and tactile enjoyment, because neither of these plants are that easy to get to bear seed. Pallidiflorum is a little bit easier from what I've seen. Wen Ling, I've tried breeding Wen Ling a few times. It's just really hard to take, but I'm not really super interested in breeding these anyways. I think a strap leaf hanging off a shelf adds so much more visual interest, different shapes, different kind of visual weight on a shelf, and it's probably one of the easiest anthurium you can find. Okay, next is a plant I've been growing since I think 2021, and it's a plant that I loved so much back then, and I think my love for it just keeps on growing. Although right now this specimen is not looking its best. It got a little bit wonky, but it's the King of Spades. This one was growing in my Millsbo and it was due a watering maybe 4 days ago, and I just got to it today. So it's a little bit puckered up, but this one was a cutting of my original mother plant, which is just right there, but it has some thrips damage. So this one's actually the better looking of the two. But this plant has been with me for a really large part of my anthurium journey, and I don't think that my collection would be complete without it. And in the interest of having variety, this one's really round, it's super puffy and pillowy, and it has the really thin spidery veins, and it has this adorable pattern where the veins do this like little curly thing and it connects to the next one. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like a monarch butterfly wing. It also has great colors. So a new King of Spades leaf is really red. It has quite a lot of purple in the leaf. Some leaves will have this like silvery bleeding, like this one has a little bit more. This specimen doesn't tend to do it as much, but I love the round and puffiness of it. And this plant also grows quite slow, and the petioles stay quite short, so it doesn't outgrow its space really quickly. The roots are really thick and they tend to do better with a little bit more drying out, so you don't have to be quite as consistent with King of Spades. And another thing is that I love King of Spades hybrids as well. I've been involved in the making of 2 King of Spades hybrids and I love them so much. They look like King of Spades. Like the King of Spades, even though it's a hybrid, the genes are so strong and established that it expresses quite consistently in hybrids. So of all the King of Spades hybrids I've made, this one is the biggest right now. This one is Red Crystal Port by King of Spades, but it's very King of Spadesy. It just kind of got a little bit like simplified, I guess. This leaf grew in my tent. I just moved out into ambient, but this one got smooshed into the tent wall. But do you see how the veins do that little King of Spades connecty thing? And here's another one. This is Dark Phoenix by King of Spades. This leaf's a little bit damaged, so I'm going to show you this one that's not quite so damaged. The Dark Phoenix is not a round plant at all, but the King of Spades made it into like a very fat and round, short little round lobes. And the venation is really thin and muted, but you can kind of see how it does that little King of Spades thing as well. Here's another one I love, but it's not my hybrid. This is from my friend Dania. King of Spades Red Crystal. This one looks very King of Spades heavy. A lot of King of Spades Red Crystal will tend to look a lot like Red Crystal with a lot bolder veins, but this one in particular leans so heavily towards King of Spades. And in contrast, this is another King of Spades Red Crystal. This is also not my hybrid. I got this from Ardean Plant. This one is very much Red Crystal heavy, not in terms of the color, but just in terms of the venation. So even though King of Spades is not that easy to breed with, it will take pollen, it will give pollen, but oftentimes, no matter if you use it as a seed parent or pollen parent, and I know this will depend on the specimen, but I'm saying like generally across the board, they can have quite small yields. It's usually worth the headache for how cute those hybrids are. So for that reason, and like the appearance and the growth habit, it definitely has a permanent place in my collection. Okay, so the next thing I would add to my collection, I didn't quite know how to word this, but I just wrote down an exceptional crystallinum. And what I mean by this is a crystallinum with very interesting webby venation. So for example, chocolate crystallinum or Heinz or a Cape Oasis. I've never owned any of these plants, and I would venture a guess to say that none of these are actually pure crystallinum. The closest thing I've ever owned to this, I still own it. It doesn't quite look the same as before. I will show it to you in a second, but the closest thing I ever owned to this was a black crystal. It had really nice venation, and I don't exactly know what happened to it, but it is now a stump. I don't know if I would categorize this as exceptional, but I loved it so much. And it wasn't the easiest, but I want it back in my collection. So this is what it looks like now. It once upon a time grew in my tent, and it had a helicopter growth pattern. So I moved it out of my tent into this shelf. It had spider mites. I repotted it, and then it rotted its roots, and recently I unrooted it and found so much root rot and stem rot, which I think stopped the growth first of all, and also made the existing really pretty leaf fall off. There was actually stem rot on top and below, so I potted it like this where there's clearance underneath the stem just to kind of suspend it in the air, so hopefully it would stop rotting. I don't know that it has, but it has 2 active growth points. There's one here and one here. So hopefully I can save this plant, but I miss this plant a lot. It's been so long since it put out that beautiful leaf, and it hasn't been the easiest. And this is why I say that a lot of crystallinum can be really easy. I would guess that those are not pure crystallinum, but then again, they do say that there's almost no actual pure crystallinum in circulation. So most of what we own aren't actually pure crystallinum, which doesn't really matter to me. Like, it's not the purity that I need. I just want the look of that really crisp, clean, sparkling silver veins. And if I were to start my collection over, I would want one with a very interesting venation pattern that looks like a spider web. So it doesn't have to be any of these particular plants, but I want a crystallinum, or what we would call a crystallinum, that has very webby venation. Dark colors. I don't super care about the emergent color on these ones. Usually these come out with like a burgundy or chocolatey emergent, totally fine. But I do think something like this would be so nice to have to contrast with everything else I've listed so far, which then brings us to red crystallinum. So I would like to have a red crystallinum. This is not the reddest thing you've ever seen. I know this is the biggest one I have. I would like a red crystallinum to provide color. I don't know if I currently own my dream red crystallinum. It's possible because some of the ones I own are not fully mature. So this one was grown from a cutting of a very old NSC red crystallinum. I have a few others to show you. Oh, actually, before I put it back, this one is very interesting because it fused its sinus. Do you see how it's partially fused? Only up to about here. This is the first time it's ever fused for me. That was pretty exciting. So this one just put out a leaf with great color, but it has a very weak root system and is in need of some rehabilitation. So it's not looking so cute, but this one is my Home Depot Doc Block Michelle. So I'd gotten this one as a gift from Sydney. Sydney, thank you if you're watching. So she lives in California. As of right now, I think Home Depots in Canada are now starting to get Doc Block plants, but at the time it was only in the States. So she went around and found some for me, Charmaine and Jing. This is the one I got, and when I got it, I potted it up in my tree fern soil mix that had the sea soil, which a lot of plants didn't like. This is a plant that did not like that mix, so I have recently repotted it into tree fern pond, and I don't really see much root action right now, but it did grow this leaf and the colors are awesome. The veins are really good. Hopefully you can kind of see the color. The green part is quite blue tinted. The veins are of course very bold and very intricate, and you can see there's a lot of red in it. There's also a lot of texture on there as well. Hopefully you can see the bumpiness. So of course, like, it's not going to look like the full expression of the leaf because they got super mangled coming out of the sheath, but this may well be my ideal red crystallinum for texture, venation, visual interest, color. And I do think that red crystallinum in general, and of course this will depend on the specimen, but in general, are very representative of standard anthurium care. So they're not as easy as, say, a Wen Ling or Pallidiflorum, but they are pretty standard. Another one I have that has really good potential, and I know the mother plant it came off of, and it's a really good one. It's just not showing it yet, but this one is Dreamweaver by Necromancer. So this one came from Tazula. It's not super red yet, but the mother plant was very colorful, very round, very bumpy. I grew this one from a leafless stump, so it's been doing okay. It's just not really sizing up for me. We'll see how this new leaf grows for me, but so far the color is not quite what the mother plant had. I'm gonna have to wait for it to get a little bit more mature, I think. This is also a plant I wouldn't necessarily have in my collection for breeding purposes. While I think it would be really cool to produce the next generation of very red crystallinums, because the red is quite a recessive trait. If you breed two red crystallinums together, like even if they're both high color, the chances of you getting very red colorful offspring, I would say, would be in the minority. So for space reasons, I'd have to get this whole batch and then grow them out to see which one starts to express colors, because they're not going to express colors right when they're like a tiny little sprout. So the space that would require, I'm not really into that idea. So I wouldn't breed red crystallinum necessarily, but I would need one just for my own personal enjoyment. So now, to contrast with all the silvery and intricate venation, I want something quite dark and minimally veined just to calm things down a bit. Because right now I'm just kind of picturing a plant wall like this and like what would look nicely balanced. So I have chosen one of either, maybe both, Ace of Spades Dark Form and Blood Moon. So I don't have a Blood Moon, but I do have an Ace of Spades. It's currently recovering from something. This is not even the newest leaf. This is like maybe 3 or 4 leaves back from the newest leaf. I had cut a lot of them off because they were getting the weird like ace pox thing, but I don't know, for some reason it didn't really ravage this leaf, so I just kept this one on. I had tried to pollinate this plant and I think it really messed it up. I want to say that's the reason. So the inflow I pollinated, it's not this one, it's like the one before. It did accept pollen and it started producing berries, and then it put out a leaf that was like not expanding. It expanded kind of soft, and like it expanded like, I want to say it was like this big. So it just kind of got stuck partway through expanding, and then it just stopped. The berries died off, and everything kind of went to crap. The roots look all right, so I kind of just cut a lot of ugly leaves off, and it's now finally pushing a new leaf. But I do think that whole fiasco was due to it not wanting to produce berries and kind of freaking out a little bit because of that. But in general, I don't think this is a very difficult plant. It acclimated to ambient conditions seamlessly. It never put out a ripped leaf for me. The only difficult thing is that with Ace of Spades, a lot of them will have ace pox, which is like this like yellow dotting that happens over the leaf. I think it can be cured with certain very aggressive antifungal treatments, but I just never bothered doing it, so I can't speak to that. But definitely something like this. Very dark, very minimally veined. I have an alternative to show you. This is an Ace of Spades hybrid. So this is Ace of Spades by Eastern Dressleri. Oh my gosh. It looks so good. I got this plant from Pau and Josh, and I have been obsessed with this ever since it put out this leaf. It's so perfect. It's pushing another one. I've got it growing in tree fern pond at the moment, and this leaf was my reward for finally upsizing it from a 3-inch pot. You know, like if we're rebuilding a collection, I'm not going to be able to get specific plants, I don't think, but I will say something like this, or the Ace of Spades. Doesn't have to be, you know, like a pure Ace of Spades, but something very minimal and super dark like this with that almond shape and the lobes that curve in towards each other. If it has that little red sinus from the Ace of Spades, that would be ideal. But also in connection with that, I think a blood moon would check the same boxes. A blood moon would have a little bit more visible venation, but it would have that really round shape with red. But the red being a very winey kind of red, I think there's like a lot of similarities between the two. Obviously they're different in a lot of ways, but if I were to rebuild my collection, I think it would need something like these two plants. And then in conjunction with round, puffy, dark minimally veined, I'd also want something really pointy, minimally veined. Ideally with a wide sinus, which I don't own, but I do have this. So this one is Papillium Fortune Ralphinum. I've used this in breeding before. It's very pointy. I would love if that sinus was just maybe like 20 degrees wider. I find in general Papillium's pretty beginner friendly. This one, maybe not so much, this particular specimen, but I do think my collection would require something very knife-like, dark, pointy. So basically I'm thinking something like Ralphinum or Fort Sherman, Ralphinum, Fort Sherman, Fort Sherman, Ralphinum, something with a wide sinus, wavy margin, kind of twisty. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. Again, it can be something like my Midnight Velvet, which I showed in last week's video. This is a unknown hybrid. This one has a little bit wider of a sinus. Definitely sometimes it gets a lot wider. It's really dark, twisty, minimal veins. This one has a hot pink sinus and hot pink veins. It's, yeah, something like this. I'm not gonna be super fussed on what exactly it is, but I do think this look would balance things out. We all go through phases, so I need something that's going to hold my interest. Sometimes I'll be really into sparkling veins or really round plants or really colorful plants, but sometimes I'll just need something very moody looking like this. So maybe one or two plants that look like this. Like with some of the other plants I wouldn't breed with, but this and that, well, this plant I have bred with in the past and it made really cute babies. This one has never flowered for me. So these plants, when breeding, you're not relying on a trait to be passed on that's super recessive. So like if I bred this one with another plant, I would expect the influence of the Midnight Velvet to come through on everything to varying degrees, of course, but it's not going to be like breeding a red crystallinum and having like 10% of them be actually red. All right, so far, everything except for the Wen Ling has been velvety. And while I know myself well enough to know that I don't like glossy anthurium for the most part, I have tried with multiple ones, but unless it's dark and glossy, I don't tend to love it for a long time. But I think there's definitely a place for a Luxurians or Luxurians hybrid. And I did have a pure Luxurians, but I think it's dead. So I'm gonna show you my current favorite Lux hybrid, which is of course my Carla Lux. I've given it some thought and I really flip-flop back and forth between like thinking I'll start over with a pure Lux or thinking I'll start over with a really standout Lux hybrid. It really depends on what's currently in front of me at the time. So right now this is in front of my face and I would say it's something like this, but I'd want it to be a really dark one where I know what it will look like mature, like if it was the Lux hybrid. So I'd want it to be a cutting of one where I can see the mother plant. So it'd probably take some time, but this is the blackest plant I own, and I think it would look really nice together with everything else. I don't necessarily want to breed Luxurians, but this particular hybrid, Carla Lux, I would want it for breeding purposes. But in general, I wouldn't want a Lux hybrid to breed with. I just want it for the semi-gloss and the texture and ideally the darkness. In terms of easiness, I would say the Lux hybrids and Luxurians are not the easiest anthurium I've ever owned. Luxurians, in my experience, are not very forgiving of inconsistent watering. Whenever I've let a Luxurians or Lux hybrid, the majority of Lux hybrids, fully dry out and then I give it water, the edema that forms around the edges tends to rot the leaf. So you'll get some permanent damage on it, whereas other plants may not show any signs of damage. This one has just been like really, I don't know, surprisingly easy for me. I just watered this morning and it's kind of soaked up a lot of the water, but it was bone dry and as you can see, it did not seem to be angry at all. So yeah, I don't think Lux and Lux hybrids are necessarily a must-have in my collection and will have a permanent, like lifetime place in my collection. But at the same time, when I picture that plant shelf, I do think there's a little niche that it fills that is unique to the Lux and Lux hybrid for the texture, like the bumpiness, like the glossiness, the color, while being heart-shaped. It's definitely a type of plant that it would be really hard to imagine my collection without. And it's also very obtainable. So if I were to start over from scratch, it would be something that I can check off quite easily. Okay, lastly is a plant that I think I'm going to need for a unique characteristic it has. This is one of the first anthurium I've ever owned, and I don't think my collection would be complete without it. And people either love this plant or hate this plant, and it's Anthurium Forgetii. So they do say that the dark form Forgetii without the silver is arguably the pure Forgetii or almost pure Forgetii, and then anything with silver venation is it has crystallinum mixed into it. So this Faghetti, I'm showing you this one first because it has been growing in a bin, so it's it's a lot less crispy. This one I got from my friend Erin. This is the mother plant. It is stunning. It's like my favorite Faghetti of all time, possibly. So I'm very lucky to have it. Like, look at the texture on this. There's so many bumps on it. It's still juvenile, so over time it will be like fully fused. It won't have this little indent. And just to contrast, this is the one growing in ambient. This is the top cutting, so it's a little bit more mature, but it's definitely not as pristine as the one growing in a bin. Here's the newest leaf. I don't know what happened to it. It got a little bit of flat mites, I think. I don't know. There was a little bit of flat mite issues in one of my exos. This came out of an exo before I made the plant wall. But there's something about these turtle leaves I love so much. And off the top of my head, I can't think of a velvet anthurium that's pelted like this. So I do think this is necessary. I would be on the lookout for one that's as textured as this. Forgetii for me have never done great in ambient. So in this new scenario where I'm starting over, I'm like, do I want to fully grow in ambient or do I want to also have a humidity enclosure? I would probably say that I'd need a high humidity enclosure of some kind. And this would be one that I would prefer to grow in humidity. This particular plant grows in ambient, but Forgetii in general grows so much, like vastly better for me in high humidity. Some other plants like King of Spades, Ace of Spades, they don't really grow that different either way. Definitely Wen Ling, probably wouldn't even notice a difference. But Forgetii and Carla would probably be the ones on this list I would prefer to grow in high humidity. But then also, I would love a Forgetii hybrid that is silvery but fully peltate. So this one is my Forgetii by Carla Amanda. This one I moved into ambient maybe like 3 or 4 months ago, and it has not skipped a beat. Like, it has not ripped itself. It resumed growing right away. It's definitely slowed down. I'm pretty sure this was the last leaf it had just put out when I moved it into ambient. So this was like out and just hardening off. And then since then it's only put out one leaf. But as you can see, there are no holes, there's no tears. It didn't have any problem forming. It's been flowering nonstop. That's the other thing with Forgetii is that they flower very young. So you can use it as a pollen parent very young. On top of having a dark form Forgetii for the very like turtley, bumpy darkness, I would also want one with silver. But in terms of existing Forgetii hybrids that have all those traits that I just listed, I think this one's one of my favorite that I've ever seen, like this batch in general. Carla Amanda has such interesting venation. It's like very like angular, and it's always very bright and bold right at the sinus. And by sinus, I don't mean this sinus because the Forgetii doesn't have a sinus, but you know what I mean? The brightness is very concentrated right at petiole insertion. If it's at all possible, if I was starting over, I would be looking for a prop of a plant from this particular batch. And that actually is the end of my list. Bear in mind, this is going to be like a foundation of a collection if I were to start over from scratch again. With the availability of cool anthuriums right now, I know it can get out of hand really quickly. So this is just really the starting point. I also try to include only things that I have experienced growing for the most part. I didn't include things that are like in my unattainable wish list, like stripey. Actually, you know what? I need to make an honorable mention to a hybrid with stripey characteristics like my Carla Black Widow Michelle. Now that I think about it, this definitely needs a place in my collection. So something like this, I know I won't be able to afford stripey unless stripey goes into TC and is super available. I don't think that's ever going to be a reality for me. So something with, you know, stripey as an ancestor like this. Let's put this in as the last entry. Anyways, I'm going to end this video here. Thank you guys so much for watching. And again, if you think I've made some horrible mistake by omitting something, if I have forgotten a plant that I absolutely need, please let me know in the comments. But I hope you're having a lovely day so far. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Mwah.